Hello, my name is Dominique Alhambra, and I am the Anthropology Collections Manager at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I am going to be talking to you today about our World Ethnology Collections move, which we did last year from July to December of 2020. So this is Pivoting in a Pandemic. So this project was funded from a really generous grant through the National Endowment for the Humanities. So this was part of the first stimulus package from 2020, and it was formally called NEH CARES, standing for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security. So we had a really quick turnaround on this. Quick background, the grant opportunity and guidelines were announced in April and the applications were due in the middle of May. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science was closed from March to June for about 100 days, and collection staff were able to return on site in the first week of June in a very limited part-time capacity. We were notified about the grant on June 15th, and the project period started July 1st. And it was an extremely competitive grant. The NEH received 2,300 eligible applications requesting over $370 million in funding. And in the end, they were able to fund 317 projects for $40.3 million, which equaled to about 14% of applicants. So it was very competitive, and we were really lucky and fortunate to receive this grant. We had awesome help from our grant officer, Jill Buig, and this grant was to move and rehouse 3,200 objects in World Ethnology storage, and that included collections from Africa and South and Central America. And the grant funds went toward a small amount of supplies, but mainly to partially support salaries for 10 staff. And the PIs were Dr. Steve Nash and Melissa Beckhofer, and it included support for curatorial staff, as well as collections, conservation, archives, and our photography staff. And we applied for $300,000 and we received half that amount, which was still awesome. And we were able to make it go really far. And in terms of the salaries, some staff had just a few hours a week, and up to the collection staff, which were on the grant almost full time. So a quick background on our storage situation. So we have a collections facility in the museum that was opened in 2013, but all the old collections were scattered all over different parts of the building. And this was one of the last remaining rooms. We previously had collections in I think 12 different storage rooms, and we were down to 3. This was one of them. And yeah, it had, your typical collection storage issues, right? There were some environmental issues with heat and airflow, certainly the overcrowding of collections on the shelves, and non-archival materials being used. You can see that there are wooden shelves, there are non-archival boxes, and the reason all of these shelving units are covered in plastic was because the building ops was in there fixing things in the ceiling, so we had to cover everything in plastic. But it was kind of the great unknown for anthropology collections. Our museum mainly focuses on Southwestern and Plains ethnology, as well as archaeology of the Southwest and Paleo-Indian archaeology, but we do have a small international collection. And this was one of the last remaining rooms. We were planning to do it last, but we felt that with this grant opportunity, this was just a great way to just tackle this head on. So we did have to adapt our rehousing process. Our rehousing process for collections we build these awesome cavity mounts that are custom made for every single object. And we do that with the help of our volunteers. And volunteers, we would get about 40 to 50 every week, and they would come in and help us build these mounts, right? And it's a full foam mount with the lining and labels. But with the pandemic and the limited opening, we couldn't be open to volunteers and staff could only be on site part-time. So we decided to scale that back a little bit and do away with the cavity mount and just do a simple lining and just the barcode. And our idea is that in the future, we can go back and finish out these mounts. But we did want to stick with the custom built boxes. So we are and did continue to build those by hand. So we ended up putting together this 5-day rehousing cycle. And I laugh because I call it beast mode, but really it was definitely every 5 days we would do a batch of objects. And so it was very, very intense. This is one of my favorite objects. It's a club from Africa, I think from the San people. It just looks really, really gnarly, but there were all sorts of treasures in there. So this was our rehousing cycle, and I want to emphasize to everybody that this was what we ended up doing that worked for our staff, but it can be scaled to fit any rehousing project. And really, it's about setting out a workflow that works for you and the staff that you have and how often they're able to be on site and what you're capable of doing with the staff that you have and the skills that they have. So we first started out with measuring objects. I would be in that storage area that you saw the photos of, and I would measure a new group of 100 to 150 objects. And again, if you have a rehousing project and you're trying to scale it, just scale it to what's feasible for you. But we were able to keep up this pretty fast pace. So that included pulling the objects off of the shelves, going shelf by shelf and emptying them out. And the measurements would go into an Excel spreadsheet with a formula that would auto-calculate the size of the box. And then I would take the objects after measuring them and then place them on a rack. So the next step would be to take reference photos. So the assistant collections manager, Jeff Fagley, he would then go up to that space and get all the objects on the rack and take reference photos for all of those. And then meanwhile, I'm back at the computer and I'm creating the group of all of those objects in our database, EMU. And then I would assign regions to the group of objects, right? It would be coded either from Africa or from Central America or from South America. And then I would also enter basic condition descriptions into EMU. As I'm unpacking and measuring things, if something was clearly broken and needed to be flagged for conservation to repair or at least do an assessment, I would do that, and this would be the point where I would enter those in. So the next step is to cut all of the boards, right? Jeff brings the objects down to the workshop from the World Ethnology storage area and then update their locations. And then he prints out the dimensions sheet and starts cutting and coding the boards, right? Every board has written on it, what's the object number, how tall is the wall, where is the object located? And then I would start assembling boxes once he had several boards going. Assembly would continue on Fridays. The conservation, one of our conservators, Catherine, she would also help out with the box assembly. It was pretty intense because with about 100 to 150 objects, that's like trying to build, 30 to 50 boxes per person, which takes a couple days. And the goal is typically to have all boxes assembled by the end of Friday. But the great thing about this system is that you can flex, up or down depending on how many objects you have for that week. And sometimes it would bleed over into Monday, sometimes you get it done ahead of time. So it all evened out in the end. On Fridays, Jeff is working from home and he's editing and processing all the photos taken from that group. And we also had help during the summer We were able to have a limited number of interns, our high school students called the Teen Science Scholars. And we had 4 wonderful students in anthropology, and they helped us build some of those mounts as well. So that really also helped us get ahead. So next step is, once the boxes are all built, if there are any really complicated ones for big oversized objects, Jeff would finish those out. And then he would also cut the palette and liner for the bottom of the box. And he would also barcode the boxes and put the objects into the boxes, right? You're marrying the boxes to the objects. And then they're loaded and sorted onto the racks by region, right? Meanwhile, on Mondays, I'm working from home. So I'm working on data cleanup with the curators, which I'll go into more detail in a little bit, and also uploading the photos into the database. And then finally, once they're ready to go, we had awesome help from our curators, Dr. Michelle Coons and Dr. Erin Baxter, and they would come in on Wednesdays and actually put away all of the objects into the cabinets in our preservation space. So that means, you know, figuring out how tall does the space have to be, popping the drawer in, and then loading all the objects onto the drawer, and then you scan the drawer, and then you scan all of the objects on the drawer. So that was a huge amount of help, and we really appreciate it. And then finally, at the end, I just go back into that group that I created in the database, and I just go through and make sure, I do a quick audit and make sure that there weren't any discrepancies or any scans missed during the barcodes. And they were extremely accurate. So if you can, it's really great just to have the support of your curators. That really meant a lot. So we repeated this process 22 times, and we ended up moving over 2,600 objects, which was 82% of the original 3,200. That is pretty awesome for half the money. And we ended up taking over 5,200 reference photos of the collection, which are now uploaded into the database, and they're available online for folks to view. And that took 29 weeks. And it ended up, we wanted to definitely wrap up the entire full project. So it ended up bleeding into Q1 of 2021. And the final totals are 3,300 objects moved and rehoused, 31 total groups, so 31 cycles, and 350 sheets of blue board, which is pretty amazing. And we did meet our target, which was the end of March 2021. So we're really proud of that. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there were many other staff that were on this grant. So there were other things going on while we were cranking out the boxes and mounts during the rehousing process. One of them was conservation assessments. And so as I mentioned earlier, I would flag objects that had damage or were broken. And then our conservator, Catherine, she would look them up in the database and request batches of objects based on what was the priority or needed the most help, right? So then we would bring the objects from the storage to her lab and leaving space and placeholders for those items in the cabinets. And they do take a while. So, but Catherine was able to finish 26 condition reports and 4 treatments for the collection. The other thing that was going on was formal studio photography for the star pieces in our collection as identified by the curators. So this is, you know, publication quality, and we ended up using it in several different materials, including the museum magazine, social media, and online web articles, and all sorts of stuff. As I said, the curators determined the priorities for what's photographed. And similar to how we worked with Catherine, we would rotate objects through the photo studio based on his schedule, and he would send them back. So yeah, between all the rehousing steps, we're also shuttling objects back and forth to conservation and to the photo studio. And Rick took 311 total images, some of which you will see in some upcoming slides. He did a really fantastic job and really brought a lot of personality to many of these objects. The other thing that was also happening, especially when some folks have to work from home due to capacity limits in the building, was data cleanup. And this was really, really key. So our thesaurus, or our culture group lexicon, we had Dr. Michelle Coons working on Central and South America, and Courtney Shesky has a master's degree in African studies. So she was our African culture group expert. And this was basically to restructure the culture group trees in that module, right? And it's to fix outdated, incorrect terms, change the sub-region structures, and removing unused terms. So for instance, the African culture tree, as it were, had over 500 terms. And we pared it down to what was actually represented in our collection, and it came down to, we brought it down to 120 culture groups. So obviously we don't have collections from every single culture group in Africa, but by bringing it down, it just really simplified it and made it less cluttered. And Melissa and Courtney and Michelle were all helping update the records to the new culture groups or the changed culture groups when they were needed. Sometimes they could be done in batches. Sometimes you had to do them one by one. And then of course I'm doing like quality control for consistency and accuracy. And Sam Schiller is our archivist and also our database manager. And so he offered, he gave us a lot of support with to the technical issues in the database. Like sometimes we would get barcoding errors, it just doesn't go through. It can be a little buggy sometimes. And certainly on CRISA reports for exporting data for curators to review. And also he helped a lot with updating and publishing the culture groups online. Once we got it down to the 120, we needed to upload that to our online IMU, a database interface. And then finally, collections research from our curators and Courtney. And this was really to identify significant items and also adding that descriptive information to the catalog records. So these are some really beautiful statues. They're figures. They're called Ere Ibeji, and they're from the Yoruba peoples. And they're twin figures, and there's a high rate of twinning for the Yoruba people, and Dr. Steve Nash is also a twin. So he wrote a Sapiens article talking about the meaning of these Ibeji figures in Yoruba society. And then we're all also contributing to the social media posts. And that stuff really adds up. I think there were over 30 to 40 posts on the Anthropology Facebook webpage, as well as the main DMNS socials, right? The Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And when we aggregated all the data, we got over 150,000 impressions, engagements, and views, which was really great. Courtney also worked on updating the website on some of these collections that were newly photographed and newly researched. We published pages on them. And Erin Baxter worked specifically on some flat art that was in the room. We looked up like kind of who are the significant artists and started checking with other art museums on, on identifying what's really the significant art that we have. As well as she's working on reanalyzing some of our shrunken heads from South America. Some of them are real and some of them are fake. And it's really about, figuring out kind of, sometimes it's like a fake head with real human hair. Sometimes it's a real human head, but it's really interesting just figuring out like how were they made, and is it possible to do and international repatriation with the peoples from that region. So that is still ongoing, but it got started because of this project. So here's my favorite part, the before and after photos of collection storage. And then of course, I will also show you what their new storage situation looks like in the preservation space where they are now. So you know, like some of those commercials where it's like, make the stuff disappear. I played around with this and I love before and after photos. So here's kind of what it looked like before, and then it disappears. I mean, it didn't disappear. It took, 6 months of really, really hard work, but it's just like so great to like see what you've accomplished in that time. So here's another shot. And that was a really packed shelf, but there it is. And this one, so this ended up being our workspace, and like we took down a whole shelving unit just to make space for us to like move around and move collections in. So this was our photography station. We were able to wheel our carts and racks in, and it just gave us more space to move. And finally, this one. I love it. And then it moved down into the Avenir Collections Center. So quick background, the Avenir Collections Center, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science built a facility. The project started in 2008 and the facility was was finished in 2013, and we started moving collections in 2014. And this is a double sub-basement, as well as 3 floors of public exhibition and classroom space. That's the Mortgage Center, and then the Collection Center, Avenir, is downstairs. And it's really great. It's LEED Platinum certified. We have these enormous, awesome workspaces, as well as these double stacked cabinets and on movable carriages in the space. And yeah, it's really great because the collections at DMNS, it's over 4 million objects. In anthropology, we have over 500,000, if not 1 million, if you counted every single sherd. And all collections at DMNS were in over 50 different spaces. Anthropology was in 12. We're now down to 2 thanks to this project. But you can see, it's white, it's bright, and it's what we do in here at the Anthropology Collections at DMNS is we organize everything by culture group. In our old storage, because of the limitations of space, it was just kind of, everything was organized by object type, right? So there's the moccasin section and the basket section and the clothing cabinets over here. And when we designed this space, we designed it with room for growth and also to accommodate the idea of putting everything together by culture groups, so that when researchers or Indigenous groups come in to look at collections, they can go to that specific people or tribe, right? So you can go to the Hopi section, you can go to the Tlingit section, and it just really helps facilitate access. Of course, for other things, like you can see the rolled textile storage over there, that's not with the rest of general 3D storage, but again, like a lot of these collections, they were folded and then shoved into cabinets, and now we can roll everything. And then here's a look at our cabinets, right? They're by Delta Designs, and they're gasketed and fabulous. And then here's the after of the African collections in the cabinets. So like I said, in the future, we're going to foam out finish the cavity mounts in the foam, as well as reorganize everything by culture group, although to have it here by region is already a huge step up from what it was before. So there's still some work to go, but like this is awesome. So yeah, some takeaways and lessons. This was a really unique opportunity for the humanities staff to unite and focus on a single project. We ca- as the title says, it's pivoting in a pandemic, and we really did. It was kind of like, all right, now you guys are back on site, and you got this grant, so we had to, put everything else on pause and clear out the workshop so we could begin this project. And what I really loved about it, as kind of the project manager, is that the process really developed organically based on everybody's skills and strengths. And well, we didn't sit down and be like, okay, well, here's the 5-day cycle, and then we're going to do this, and this on these days. It just became that just through like the process. Like, let's test how long this is going to take us, and see where it goes from there. And yeah, it's really about like adaptability and flexibility. And that was also built into the system. We're still doing this grant in the context of our full jobs. Like, I'm still answering research requests on digitally, at least. And, there's like the curators are still working on their research projects. And, like, we're still doing everything else. But the system is really flexible in that way that like we could just kind of like, okay, well, we can push that to tomorrow, and then we can also catch up on like Thursday or whatever. And it just worked out really well. But I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely very fast paced. And it takes like grit and grind with the work, right? Like, I'm building boxes like 8 hours a day, like full stop. And yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and also I listen to a lot of pop music. So, but it's really about like being motivated throughout the entire process. And for, a short 6-month project, like if you really buckle down, I mean, we were able to do so much. Yeah, and then finally, our future directions. As I said, we will continue to finish out the mounts and add the cavity mounts, finish the full paper label, and do the culture group reorganization. In the room, there's the flat art is still in the room because we have to install that on our art rack, as well as in our flat files. And there's a small bead collection that also needs to be reckoned with, but all of world ethnology did get finished. And certainly there's the found and collection stuff. There's about, I'd say, there were 50 to start with, but I was able to reconcile a lot. So there's about like 30 left, but those need like reconciliation and just, decisions made on what to do with them. And then of course there's, deaccessions, right? And just trying to figure out, what do we want to keep, and what's kind of like, maybe, these collections were accepted in the past, but, research wise, like maybe they have like less potential, because it does take up a lot of space. It's really funny. This photo is an example. We had a really awesome diorama and full out exhibit on Aztec in the 90s. And it's really interesting because a lot of these baskets that you see in this exhibit and diorama, as well as some of the clothing, I mean, they were sourced in Mexico and then put into this exhibit. And then they accessioned like all of the exhibit props, literally from this exhibit. And yeah, like they have data, for like, we know where it was collected, and we know where it was made, and it's from literally 1993, but it's a lot of baskets. And so our curators can make more informed decisions now that we know more about what's in the collection. And of course, as you know, it's like, all right, what are you going to do with the empty room? And we have applied for a few more grants, and we're hoping to use it as a processing space for 2 of our archaeological collections that that need cataloging and processing. So we're really excited for that, as well as the potential for community collaborations in identifying and using some of these things. So, all right, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope this was interesting, and it really was a group effort, and I'm so grateful to be working with the folks that I work with here. It's really fantastic. So thank you.